You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and if you're aware of the discussions that concern the State of Israel, one area of concern among many who care deeply about the Jewish character of the State of Israel is the extent to which there has been perhaps a failure to instill among the younger generations of Israelis a real sense of Jewish identity. There can be a difference between feeling Israeli and feeling Jewish. And is it enough for an individual to simply live in what is called Ba'aretz, in the land of Israel, to be a Jew in the sense of having a connection with Jews throughout history and Jews all over the world today? There are those who feel that for all the successes of the State of Israel, there has been not enough concern paid to creating and instilling a strong sense of Jewish identity among Israelis who are growing up in Israel today. That's what we're going to be discussing with two extraordinary people who are dear friends of mine and who always bring very special insight to any topic they discuss. Once again, it is my pleasure to welcome back Isi Leibler, a former leader of the Jewish community of Australia, a pioneer in the Jewish community's efforts to save Soviet Jewry. And after making Aliyah, Isi now lives in Jerusalem and has become a distinguished columnist for the Jerusalem Post. Isi, thank you for joining me again.
Nice to be with you.
It's wonderful to have you here and not only on a transatlantic call.
Thank you.
And I'm also pleased to welcome back Barry Spielman, Director of Communications in North America for the Jewish Agency of Israel. Barry made Aliyah in 1988. He is a lieutenant colonel in the IDF Reserves, and he's back here now in America, serving for a few years as a representative of the Jewish Agency. Barry, thank you for sitting with us.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be back. Thank you.
All right, I want to open it up to hear what the two of you have to say. Isi, to what extent and where are you concerned about the Jewishness, the Jewish identity, Jewish character of Israelis today?
I think the biggest weakness we have in society in Israel today is the nature of the educational system, which tends to encourage tribalization and polarization. You have really four different systems. You have a system which, for want of a better expression, is described as the secular system. That's the majority system, which teaches very, very little about Bible and Jewish values, less so than they did, say, 50 years ago, when the old Zionists, yes, less so, certainly less biblical studies. You then have the religious Zionist groups, the Mamlachti Dati section, which tries to give a broader overview and is Zionist. You have a burgeoning and growing Haredi section, much of which is non-Zionist, and a large proportion of which is not providing children with the essentials required to be able to live a normal life. They're going to be living off the state because they're not getting a decent Jewish education. And then, of course, you have the Arab system. And I think one of the weaknesses of the government is that whereas there is a kind of a justification for having different systems, there should be a central curriculum to which all should be committed to. And the weakness of the secular governments of Israel was, in particular the Olmert government, gave up completely with the Haredim, with the ultra-Orthodox, and enabled them to continue to get full state funding, whereas they're really living in a different planet. Something they would not be able to do in the diaspora, not in America, not in Europe. So these are problems, and that creates an environment where you have different people who are not quite moulding into the nation we would like. We, of course, I haven't gone into the other side of the equation. You're still living in a Jewish country, where you have the Jewish festivals, where you have Shabbat, and where, you know, I cannot compare Israel to, say, Australia, or even a Jewish city like New York. It is a Jewish state. But there's a lot to be wanting, and I think there will be improvements. What I found dramatic were the surveys which showed that, contrary to the general feeling that Israelis, the vast majority of Israelis were not traditional, were atheistic and secular, the word secular in Israel is really, to a large extent now, applicable to people who are non-observant. And there's a confusion there. You have a lot of people who are non-observant in the full sense of the word, but are nevertheless part of traditions of the Jewish life and of Jewish values.
So there would be Jewish traditions in their home, even if they would not be Shomer Shabbat or wholly observant.
You have, for example, many synagogues where you see people going and saying Kaddish, and then going out and playing football in the afternoon on Shabbat, which you would not see in a more Ashkenazi type environment where it's either or. I think that this polarization is very much an Ashkenazi attribute.
Interesting.
The Sephardim are much broader, and you will therefore find many of them who are not observant that still keep things like Pesach, some form of Shabbat observance, a respect for tradition. And I think that if you look at Israel of today compared to Israel of 40 years ago, there's been a dramatic improvement in the context of a lot of the people from the completely anti-Israeli, secular homes moving closer. The thing that worries me is that in the secular system, though, an Israeli who grows up there can, if I can take the extreme case, and I'm taking an extreme case, so I'm not generalizing, you can really describe him to some extent as a Hebrew-speaking Canaanite, because he speaks the Hebrew language, he has Hebrew culture. But in terms of Jewish values and Jewish traditions, and even sometimes Jewish culture, he does not have the essence of anything other than national and ethnic status. And when those people come to the diaspora, they're very often lost. And they're amazed when they see the kind of denominational life which is even not orthodox in conservative and reform groups.
Okay, Barry, here you are. You grew up in America, then you make Aliyah. So you bring a very different perspective. As you experience Israel today, how do you respond to some of the things Isi is describing?
Well, I'd like to actually start from the last thing you said, because it's so applicable to what we do at the Jewish Agency. We have a phrase that we sometimes say that a lot of our shlichim, shlichim are the people that we send, like myself, who come to the United States or other parts of the world. Representative for a couple of years. And a lot of the people who come are people like you described in the last category, who are very Israeli or very patriotic, but their sense of Jewish values, let's say, to put it politely, is lacking. And then they come here, and all of a sudden they see the Jewish community, which, by the way, you can't make any comparisons to the community that you see here to the way life is in Israel. It's very different.
In what way?
And well, first of all, the American style of Jewish community is extremely organized, and everything here revolves around the synagogue. When I first moved to Israel and made Aliyah back in 1988, we moved to Petach Tikva, which I don't think anyone can accuse of not having a large Orthodox community or people who are very involved. But I felt very lost because I was living and very involved in Washington, D.C. And when you live in this country, especially in a place like Washington, D.C., you've got to go out of your way to be involved with the community. Correct. Everything revolves around the synagogue. Everything revolves around your friends from around the synagogue. And all of a sudden we come to Petach Tikva, and there's a synagogue on every street. On every street. There was absolutely no sense of community. People went to the synagogue because and maybe that's what they should do. They go there to pray, and that's it, and they go home. But there was nothing beyond that. And I felt lost. And ultimately, it led me and my wife to look for a smaller community. We found it in in a yeshuv, because that was set up in the closest thing that we could find to what we were used to in the American Jewish community, which I think there are aspects of that which in Israel we have a lot to learn from. And so going back to the idea...
I'm sorry, what do we have to learn from?
About how the community itself is organized, about how you can get people involved in the community through various different activities.
Other than the synagogue.
Other than the synagogue. I mean, here we have the JCC. That's a conversation in itself. But the the average Israeli isn't aware of how the Jewish community, I put that in quotes because it may be different in different parts of the world, but they're certainly not aware of how the Jewish community works here. And then we have shlichim who come here. And they're here for a couple of years, and they're exposed to this kind of thing. And we like to say, and many people have said it, I've heard it said by a lot of these people, they came here as Israelis, they go back as Jews. And a lot of these shlichim who have now been exposed to this become shlichim now in the other direction when they go back to Israel. Because now, in many ways, they've experienced a taste of that communal life, which was missing for them.
That's so fast. I want you to develop the point one more moment for me.
Sure.
What is different about them when they go back that you would say they came as Israelis and went back as Jews? What was added to their Israeliness that you're trying to describe here?
Yes, I think it's also at the heart of where at least we at the Jewish Agency these days have identified a serious problem. When people come back from shlichut, you can't help but feel that you're part of something a lot larger. There's a large global Jewish community out there. It's not just in the state of Israel. Today's state of Israel is the largest Jewish community. I think statistically we've now reached that point where there are more Jews living in Israel than any other place in the world. And if up until now, perhaps in the last decades, the United States has been the center, that center has now shifted to Israel, as I'm happy it has, okay? But there is a larger sense of responsibility to Jews who live in other parts of the world, Jews who are in distress. You know, traditionally, the Jews have mobilized around the Soviet Jewry movement, around other movements. If Israel's in danger with Iran and other things, here in America and other parts of the world, people gather. But in Israel, there's sometimes a sense that, this is it. We're here and there's no one else out there. Well, that's not true. There are millions of Jews who live outside of the state of Israel, and there's that symbiotic relationship between the diaspora and the state of Israel. The state of Israel is very important to the diaspora. It's critical. In fact, in many ways, it is the identity that sparks a lot of that involvement in the diaspora of many Jews. But the diaspora is also important to Israel for a lot of reasons, and so this connection is extremely important. We've been seeing a lot, unfortunately, that this connection in many places has been frayed. It's eroding. We're seeing the erosion of Jewish identity not only in the diaspora, we're seeing it also in Israel. And that is very sad, especially when you're living in the Jewish state. And I think that we fear and feel that many people who live in Israel, particularly I think it would be characterized as the last set of people that you identified in your analysis, are missing this connection that they're part of something larger, and that they're Kol Yisrael Aravim Zelazeh, they're responsible also, okay? And when they come here, it's an eye-opener.
Do you find that to be true to some extent? That there is within Israel either a lack of or not a great enough sense that the Israeli is connected to other Jews? From the American perspective, there is almost an axiom, we are one. And one of the ways in which we try to excite Jewish identity in America is by trying to explain to our children and other adults that you're connected to the people of Israel and to Jewish communities all over the world. To what extent is that missing in your experience among a significant portion of the Israeli people?
I'd say there's a bit of a contradiction insofar as, on the one hand, yes, you're quite right, Israelis tend to be self-centered, tend to think about themselves, and I think there's a very good reason for that. The reason is one that they're living on the edge of existential threats throughout. They're living a life which is quite different from Jews in the diaspora. And when we say we are one, we are not really one. We are one from the same stock, but our lives are quite different because the American Jew will go home, will do his business, will pick up his newspaper and read and be reading and be living in a normal environment in his own community. The Israeli is living in a tension pressure cooker continuously. And the cycle of parents with children going into the army is something that no diaspora Jew can properly understand. I couldn't understand that because my children came in late, but my grandchildren are in the army now, and I do understand that. And it makes for a different attitude. So, on the one hand, yes, Israelis are self-centered. They don't really have that global appreciation. But if you look, and I say with respect to American Jews, Australian Jews and European Jews, it may be that a small minority of them are very conscious, but 85% of them, forgive me if I'm being very cynical, are leading a life where being Jewish is incidental, not central. And in Israel, being Israeli is not incidental because their lives are on the line.
Okay, and I just want to push you one more moment. I think what you say is fascinating and true. And there is always in me, both as a rabbi, as a Jew, and as somebody involved in media in the Jewish world, a tension of my own between, on the one hand, saying to people, we are one with the Israeli people, but understanding so clearly what you just said, that we don't live, we do not experience the same existential existence that the Israeli does, because, again, when I go home, I never worry about any Katusha or Qassam rocket falling on my backyard. I don't ever worry that my children or my grandchildren are going to be in harm from someone who doesn't want me in the region. And so I can only empathize. I can't really have the same ability that the Israeli has. And yet at the same time, I want to feel that I am as close to you living in Jerusalem as I possibly can. But then you say that the American Jew, Jewishness is incidental, and for the vast majority of American Jews, it is true.
I said the vast majority. Okay. Only the vast majority.
But when you say that Israeliness is central to the Israeli, that's not necessarily Jewishness. And I think you have put your finger on the whole purpose that the three of us are sitting together. To what extent is it a Jewish connection? When Barry speaks about the shlichim who come here and then go back differently, it's what I've experienced. And there are many Israelis who come to my synagogue and say, I never saw Judaism in this form because we don't have it to be seen. And the problem of a lack of expansive pluralism in Israel may be one of the problems that the Israeli also
very much so.
Okay. But when they see a Judaism that is experienced by American Jews, which is so joyful and is all about yes, not about no, I have a feeling that many of them go back and say, I wish there was something like this, even though it is not indigenous to the Israeli. And maybe at some point we'll discuss to what extent can you import American Jewishness or Judaism into Israel. But I want you to speak now one more time. To what extent is what you're describing, the Israeli is essentially Israeli, but not Jewish? It's true, Judaism is not the core of many American Jews, but is Judaism the core of most Israelis?
You're asking an extraordinarily difficult question because you try to compartmentalize it.
Yes.
I would say that there are more, proportionately, I'll put it back in your court. Proportionately, more Israelis are Jewish than proportionately American Jews are Jewish. So what I'm saying to you, yes and no.
Okay.
But if you ask me proportionately, yes.
Okay,
many more of us are more Jewish than the proportion of Jews in the diaspora.
And there's good reason for that.
Oh, of course.
Because this, like you said before, there's a surrounding.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of times we've had dialogues here with people about the differences between so-called secular Jews in Israel and, say, the different denominations of Jews over here, because it's very interesting. And in many ways, you take conservative or Reform Jews, and they are very active in their own way, perhaps more active than your typical secular Jew in Israel. Having said that, because we have the holidays are part of your daily life, and because the whole calendar surrounds Jewish events and it's always there, and because Judaism is part of politics, which is a separate discussion, may very well be part of all of these issues that we're talking about. So I think that's I fully agree with that. I think that's exactly the case, and I agree with the proportions. But I think that it's still very worrisome that there is such a a large proportion of Israelis who are missing that connection to those Jewish roots, which is, after all, at the core of it, why we're there in Israel. I mean, we could have been in Uganda, and we could have been in other places, and we're in Israel because this is the land of Israel, and that goes back to Jewish roots.
Okay, would the two of you speak to the fact that historically, the early Chalutzim and the early wave of Jewish leaders, the Ben-Gurions, who came, and as opposed to Menachem Begin, but the Ben-Gurions who came, they wanted to be secular Jews.
Yes.
Even though they
Yes.
came from deep, rich Jewish backgrounds, they wanted to shed it. And
Absolutely.
they wanted to be biblical Jews. Yes?
Ethnic
Ethnic Jews.
purely
They
ethnic.
still wanted to be in that spot.
Yes, but they wanted to be there not... The example given is the following. If a Jew celebrates Sukkot in America, in theory, he is celebrating an event that occurred in the Jewish people's history, the wandering through the desert. If we celebrate Shavuot, we're celebrating the moment when we stood at Sinai to receive the Torah. In Israel, Shavuot and Sukkot are national holidays.
Yeah.
You don't have to be told it's Sukkot or Shavuot. It doesn't happen, and the day doesn't occur, and somebody says, oh, you missed it. Everybody knows it. But when they celebrate, when Israelis celebrate Shavuot, are they celebrating it as an Israeli agricultural national holiday, or are they celebrating it as the moment when the covenant was given at Sinai? We stood at Sinai together and received the Torah, and therefore ultimately went on to the land of Israel because we were the Jewish people.
I think it depends.
I would say that there is a move towards the more Jewish inclination, a move towards it which is hampered by the most reactionary rabbinate that we've ever had.
Talk more about that.
Which
First
is
of all, you say there's a move towards it, so you're saying that at
I'm
one
saying
time...
there's a search for Jewish tradition amongst Israelis, including some secular, some more sensitive secular ones, many of whom are even, you read about them going and learning the texts and doing things that their parents would have frowned upon and regarded
all
as
that
ridiculous.
must make you very happy.
Yes.
And at the same time, you're saying that this is a new move.
Yes,
That this is a new
trend.
development.
It's a trend which has emerged the last 2 decades, and I believe is growing, but hampered because of a rabbinate.
What does that mean?
It's hampered because the religious institutions have been hijacked by the most ultra-Orthodox elements in Jewish history, just about, and because of the political leverage, the excessive political leverage which they can impose, they have really distorted many aspects of Jewish traditional and religious life, and making it very difficult and alienating many people that could, by example, be brought closer, but are being pushed away because of the view of these people who are negative, who are living in a world in which they reject reason, and which they're entitled to if they were living amongst themselves. But to try to impose that on the whole of the country, to have the chief rabbinate, which was the seat which was created in order to try to bring halakha, Jewish law, into line with a Jewish state, to see all of these things happening today in reverse, even trying to turn back things like the Shemitah from Rav Kook, all these things happening when they impose on ice cream Chalab d'Yisrael, which no Jewish community in the world would do, not to mention, to me, the most outrageous of all, the one-dimensional approach to conversion, which, by the way, is a legitimate one for them, but not for the whole state and not for the whole people. And they're imposing it on the people, and the 2 chief rabbis are puppets, elected and put into position by the ultra-Orthodox. And I say this as an observant Jew, and I feel deeply distressed about it. It really eats me up.
No argument for me.
But you are both, in essence, part of the modern Orthodox community in Israel, correct?
I certainly would describe myself to that. I share, Izzy, I share your deep concerns. I mean, and you know, over the last few years before I came here on Shlichut, we live in a community that you know, our rabbi is one of the Tzohar rabbis, and we came up against this Shemitah new edict. I mean, for hundreds of years,
Yep.
Shemitah has been an accepted thing. It keeps Jewish farmers in business.
Explain to the audience what Shemitah is.
Every 7 years,
Exactly.
according to halakha, Jewish law, the land has to lay fallow, which means you can't till your farms in Israel. That's going to put people out of business. Well, in a similar kind of context, you know, and I'm not the expert on this, but in a similar kind of context to us being able to sell the bread. So on Passover, we allow the farmers to sell the land so that we're able to.
There was a technicality.
Rav Kook introduced it 100 years ago.
So allowed ultimately
Yeah.
the land to still be used
Yes.
even during the Shemitah year.
But we found our situation, correct me if I'm wrong, that a few years ago we were saying, or the rabbinate was coming and saying, listen, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And now we prefer to actually buy food and
From Arab
vegetables
countries.
from Hamas,
Yeah.
down in Gaza, because that's not
Yeah.
technically the land of Israel. And therefore we prefer to subsidize their Qassam rockets rather than keeping Jewish farmers in business.
And it was one of the few times that I found that the Supreme Court did a good thing by stopping them. I don't always approve of what the Supreme Court does in
Okay,
Israel.
you also
but-
mentioned the milk issue. Explain the milk issue.
Well, the milk issue,
The
there
halav.
is an old tradition in the Middle Ages that we did not drink milk that was not supervised because a lot of the milk used to come from animals that were not kasher. Now, there are not too many animals around, and, you know, this is just unheard of. There are small groups of ultra-Orthodox Jews that still keep that up, and they're entitled to
And
it.
they
I
have the right
respect
to
them
do- they have
and
absolute every right to do
But
it.
to impose that on the state, it's unheard of. There's no Jewish community in the world where the Beit Din would do such a thing, except in Israel. And I'm saying it's time to get up. And I'm very unhappy with the rabbis, my own rabbis. I've got some who are very brave and courageous, but until they get up and have the guts to set up their own Beit Din and say, we're going to set up our Beit Din, we're going to make our rules, you keep your rules, we'll keep our rules, and that means a split. Until that happens, we're going to go down and down and down a morass.
I think that just to keep going on that, I think that the real, you know, the concern here we have is that you keep alienating people. Yeah, you're alienating a lot of people here for sure. Okay, in the diaspora, it's one of the things that really turns.
Yeah, but it's
people-
in Israel. I'm much more concerned about
No,
Israel.
I agree with you, and I think that part of the historic alienation of Jews who may not be observant or may not be involved on the Jewish side are because of these kind of things.
Yeah.
And I think that I mean, maybe this isn't the place to do the historical analysis, but a lot of the people who also came from Europe, who came early to settle in Israel, who were anti-religious and anti-everything Jewish, came from that same kind of a world. Okay,
And they were rejecting it.
They were and they were. This was their way of rejecting it. And you know, I don't think this is right. I don't think imposing anything on anyone is right either. I'm very much a believer in the middle of the road to the extent that that's you're able to do it, and you're not always able to do it. But in this particular case, I think the big picture is we have succeeded over the years in alienating a lot of people.
The core problem emanates from the electoral system. If they did not have this excessive power whereby a government feels dependent on the ultra-Orthodox parties, none of this would have been tolerated because the people are up in arms. And I'm predicting that in the next election there's a window of opportunity because there's going to be a shuffle, there's going to be changes. And I must say, if Tzipi Livni would not have been so obsessed with becoming Prime Minister, and if she and Netanyahu would have got together, they could have sorted this out and made a unity government, which would have been much better for the country and for everybody. And this is one of the things that could have been sorted out. I'm hoping that it may happen now.
We have to pause for just a moment, then we'll continue. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Goldman. We're talking about the Jewish character of the Israeli people in the state of Israel today with Isi Leibler, distinguished columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and Barry Spielman, Director for Communications in North America for the Jewish Agency. Incidentally, when Natan Sharansky became the chairman of the Jewish Agency, he made a dramatic statement, and I just want to hear you react to it. His statement was, it's not that we don't continue to care for Jews if they're ever in trouble anywhere in the world, but that the vast majority of Jews who were in trouble have been saved. and that now the emphasis of the Jewish Agency is going to change to, in essence, saving Jewishness, both among, in the diaspora, the Jewish character of the diaspora Jewry, but also, he said, about the Jewish character of the State of Israel and the Israeli population. That was a daring, dramatic statement, but in essence, it set a new agenda, Barry. Have I got it right?
About 100%. I think that, there's been a lot said over the last year and a half that the Jewish Agency has moved to a new strategic plan, which is being implemented. It takes time. It's an organization that it's large. It's been around a long time. It basically established the state. It was the state before it became the state, and has so much to its credit that not, people don't necessarily know. In Israel, by the way, the Jewish Agency is well known, but has an image these days of being, a bureaucratic, large organization. Here in America, for example, most people have no idea what the Jewish Agency is doing. And that's a shame because, it built the country, it brought in the immigration. But the truth is today, we're living in a period of time where 95% of the Jewish world is in countries that they're not at risk,
Correct.
at least today. Okay, and you caveat that because life in the world is very dynamic, and what's true today may not be true tomorrow. For those people who still live in lands of that could be dangerous or at risk, and there's at least 60,000 Jews we identify are in that situation. We don't like to talk about it too much, but at a given notice, that's our responsibility. It always was, it always will be, for us to be able to get them out if we have to. But the vast majority of people, we want to attract them, and the way we believe that we do that is through giving them an Israel experience, whether it's sending them or getting them to go on Israel programs like Birthright, Masa, and a new program that we're introducing that's a shorter term because we found a gap between the long-term Masa program of 9 to 12 months and 12 days and Birthright, several months. But when people come back from these programs, there's something that's changed in their lives. I am a great example. I could be a poster child for the Jewish Agency in the sense that before I went to Israel in 1981 on what was called at the time Tochnit Yud Gimel, or 13th program for the 13th year. My last half year of high school, I went to Israel for the first time. I'm a Yeshiva Flatbush graduate here from Brooklyn, and they had a program where you can go for half a year. I had never been there before. I honestly had no serious interest to go. I never thought I would stay there. I had a full scholarship to a university that I really wanted to go to. And when I went to Israel, all of a sudden, my life changed. And here I am, years later, having lived in the country now for years, an officer in the IDF, a shaliach on behalf of the Jewish Agency, coming back to work with the American Jewish community. And like me, thousands, tens of thousands of other people have had that experience. It makes a change in their life. But like Natan said, it's not just about the Jews in the diaspora. It's also about what happens in the state of Israel. And that's an essential part of the strategic plan, to try to rejuvenate that Zionism of old that's somewhat lost today, and to try to get young Jews, young Israelis, I should say, they're Jewish, but young Israelis back involved in their own Judaism.
Well, I'm all in favor of trips to Israel. I think the Birthright's marvelous. I think Masa's marvelous, and anything that gets people to Israel, even if it's for a short time. And I was a cynic a little bit because huge amounts of money involved in each kid, but it's paid off, and I think it's a great scheme. But I regret to say that I feel that Israel, and when I say Israel, I say the government of Israel, the Jewish Agency, the World Zionist Organization, have been catastrophic failures in terms of building bridges between Israel and the diaspora. They have failed. Now, there's no quick solutions, but I don't think they're doing their job. I think the emphasis is wrong. And when I hear talk about Jewish values, I get a little bit nervous because Jewish values are a great expression. It means very little. You're not going to change Israelis. The Jewish Agency is not going to have an impact on Israelis. The Jewish Agency can have, and the government of Israel can have an impact on Jews in the diaspora if they can build up the bridges that should be there. You have a World Zionist Organization, which nobody in the diaspora even knows exists. Its budget is down to next to nothing. Its political activities are zero. We have a world which has turned against us, and we don't have even a proper international Hasbara structure coming from Israel operating against this. So I say that the organizations involved, and I say the Jewish Agency is only one of them, and they're doing very important work in other areas, but Nathan Sharansky, who I know personally, who I have enormous admiration for, obviously, my involvement in Soviet Jewry, I certainly know what he represents, one of the great heroes of the Jewish people, but I fear that in terms of the Jewish Agency, he has not been the success that I hoped he would be. There's still time to come, and I hope he will achieve what I know his objectives are good, but if you're asking me, a lot of money, a lot of activity, and very few results.
Right,
it needs a change.
Without commenting on Natan one way or the other, when you hear Isi say that he's disappointed in the success of the Jewish Agency in terms of building this bridge, what's your reaction?
Well, I respectfully disagree. I mean, I think that the Jewish Agency over the years has done tremendous work, and now we've reached the point where we're shifting a little bit. When you shift, it takes some time. In terms of the Israel Experience programs, I don't know, we can't argue with statistics, and we've done a lot of research.
I'm with you on that.
A lot of research that proves dramatically how much this stuff makes impact. Now, not everyone's going to come on Aliyah, and a lot of the people who come on these programs remain active in their Jewish communities over here, which frankly, in today's day and age, is also very important.
I think so.
Okay? And so it also depends on what you define as success. In terms of a bridge, I mean, it is to the Jewish Agency that the government of Israel turns to many times when it wants to try to find that bridge. Who else are you going to turn to try to find a bridge between Reform, Orthodox, and Conservative about the issues of the time? To say we're going to find a solution? I don't know. We may be sitting here arguing around this what do you call it, this conversion issue forever unless things in the politics of the state of Israel change. Okay, and that's a separate question. That's above the pay grade of the people at the Jewish Agency. That's Israeli politics. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's to the Jewish Agency that we turn to. Change is difficult, and there's a lot of people out there who may not feel that this change is right, and I respect their view. But we've tried what we've tried up until now, and I think it takes a lot of guts, and I think it takes a lot of leadership and a lot of vision to stand up and make the kind of changes and kind of new strategic direction that Natan Sharansky and Alan Hoffman and the rest of the leadership have done. And I think we've got to give it some time to work.
Can I ask you to come back to an issue you touched on a little while ago? You talked about how upsetting it is for you to see the political system in Israel where the small ultra-Orthodox parties have a disproportionate control. And in general, what would be your solution to the political makeup at the moment, and for that matter, the stranglehold of the religious parties on Israel?
There has to be electoral reform, and if there's electoral reform which reduces the number of parties, it will mean that a few splinter parties will not have quite the same excessive leverage in determining whether a country, whether a government is going to stay in office or not. Because today, Netanyahu is in a position where if all the religious parties walk out, he could just lose his government. Mm-hmm. And this is an impossible situation. And as a result, they're able to extort. They're one-dimensional. They're only interested in themselves to a very large extent. And it's not the national interest. And I'm praying that this will change in the near future. But there's also a need for religious Jews in Israel, I mean moderate religious Orthodox Jews, to stand up and say, you don't represent us. The vast majority of us want to be part of the nation state. We are Zionists, we are moderate, we can fuse our religion, Torah, with Madar, with intelligence and with rationality. And I mean, they're playing an extraordinary role in society as it is. And look at them in the army. In terms of their numbers, the religious Zionist element is extraordinary in combat units. And they're the best.
So why aren't they standing up and saying it, just as you articulated?
Because I think the rabbis have all got some sort of a complex about the ultra-Orthodox, about standing up against them. It's been inbred into them. And I think there's a time they have to stand up and say, we are our own people, and we're going to look after her. And if they don't do that, it's just not going to happen.
As we talk, there seem to be so many internal contradictions, not only to the social scene, but to what we're saying. I want to just reflect some things, and I want to hear what you have to say. On the one hand, we talked about to what extent does the average Israeli feel the slogan we use in America, "We are one," whether the American Jew feels what the Israeli does or not, that's certainly the ideology. To what extent does the Israeli feel that? And we talked at the beginning about how there may be some Israelis who don't have that sensitivity. And yet when we look at it from America and we see how Israeli combat units very often are sworn in with the notion of never again, and never again means the entire Jewish people shall never again have to face any kind of Holocaust situation. Or when we see an Entebbe and the Israeli Israeli planes take off and fly what had to seem like a world away to save Jews, most of whom were not Israelis, but they were just Jews, on a tarmac in Entebbe. And there was this sense that the IDF, the Israeli army, does not only protect the Israeli people, which is their overwhelming mandate, but that somehow they do protect the Jewish world, both symbolically, emotionally, and maybe in some rare instances, literally. So that the American Jew celebrated Entebbe, for example, and celebrates some of the things that the IDF does. And here in America, the Friends of the IDF is one of the most successful Jewish organizations going. It's just thrilling to see the way in which American Jews support the average Israeli, who's basically a civilian high school student, who then has to spend 2-3 years serving the State of Israel. There is within the State of Israel somewhere a sense in the Israeli people that they are the front lines, not simply in Israel, but for the Jewish people as a whole.
I think undoubtedly there is. This is unquestioned. The weakness from the Israeli viewpoint is, I think there's a tendency to underestimate the diaspora and to look upon them as nebuchs. But in terms of reality, they do feel that it's their role to protect the Jewish people. And if there's anti-Semitism in countries, you'll get the Israeli representatives in those countries getting up and raising his voice. We have a voice at the United Nations which doesn't only talk about Israel, but very proudly takes up issues which have Jewish interest. So there's that. But as I say, the weakness is a tendency to underrate the role of diaspora Jews. And it's a big mistake because, believe me, when you talk about the war of ideas and the fact that we've been doing so badly, there are so many talented Jews in the diaspora willing and able to work in conjunction with us, who, if we could bring them together, and this is the areas where I think the Jewish Agency and the government of Israel have failed, if we could bring those people together in one table to work together, we could change the face of the map. Well, it's an exaggeration. We could have a very, very big impact. And one of the things I keep telling Israelis, do not underestimate. Yes, assimilation in the diaspora is pretty horrific. There are large numbers of Jews disappearing all the time. But a Jewish identity will always remain in diaspora as long as the world exists. And we have to work with it, we have to stimulate it, and those that don't come to Israel, we have to give them respect and try to make them recognize that the centrality of their lives is still Israel, even if they're living in New York or in Melbourne or in Paris.
Okay. First of all, am I being too, is it too romantic the way I said it?
No, I think you were right. I think that that's how most Israelis feel, and I fully, other than the line about the Jewish Agency, I fully agree with everything you said, and I think it's a direct analysis, and I want to actually delve into that, because one of my first experiences I had as a green American off the boat, okay, at Bar-Ilan University in 1981, I was in a class on the Shoah, on the Holocaust, and in that class, there were Israeli army officers who, strangely enough, later on in my career, I got to know. But at that point, I was just, some 18-year-old American kid who was helping them with their English, okay? And we were in a Holocaust class. And to this day, I will never forget it. But these were officers in the Israeli army who openly asked the question, and they weren't trying to be, this was honesty. How could that happen? I mean, if somebody started up with us like that, we'd bomb the hell out of them. It wasn't in their understanding that something like this can happen, because in the Israeli mentality, certainly back in 1981, before a lot of the other stuff had happened, it's just simply where you start up with us. Are you kidding me? We're gonna, you're not gonna get away with it. And I found that, very strange. I was later, my aunt, who is a Holocaust survivor, as my father, they're from Krakow, they did a book recently about it, and she has this whole section about when she escaped Poland in 1944 and made it to the shores of Israel, okay, before it was a state. They were basically, these refugees were rejected by the local population at the time because they were viewed, like you said it, as nebuchs. How could you allow this to happen to you? It's not an Israeli psyche. And at the same time, the same Israelis feel, and I really think that this is true, okay, that we are one, and we are doing this on the front line. Another thing that you probably, can attest to this, one of the things you see in Israel is it's a very fractious society on a day-to-day basis. But God forbid, something happens, including a car accident on the side of the road. You have never seen people toss it all to the wind and come together in so quick and such an incredible way, because at the end of the day, we understand, and I think Israelis understand, that this is it. We are all in this together. And so I agree full-heartedly that the Israeli representatives around the world are doing what they're doing, not just for Israel, they're doing it for the local Jewish communities. We feel that we're responsible for local communities, and we don't take the diaspora Jews seriously enough. As you said, I think the average Israeli doesn't really understand how it works, and they underestimate it. It leads to another question that you may or may not want to get into, but I certainly have faced this over the last couple of years here in my shlichut of what are the legitimate borders of criticism of the state of Israel coming from the diaspora. I can't tell you how many times I sat on panels and sat on sessions when that issue of, okay, we can tell you what to do, where do you draw the line? You draw the line at religious points, you draw the line at national security issues, because their kids aren't the ones.
That's a fascinating question, and I've asked it of Izzy before. How do you answer it when you're asked it?
I'll tell you what I answered, and I got into some trouble.
Go ahead.
And I got into trouble from one of the Tzohar rabbis, which I was surprised, actually, that Rabbi Rafi Forstein, who kind of put me in my place at the time. I felt, and I still do, I actually stand by this, I feel that on issues that are related to the Jewish people as a people, issues of religion, and issues that can affect someone from America whose Jewish identity is on the line.
For example?
Conversions,
okay.
And anything that's related to Shemitah and all the stuff that we've been talking about before. I feel they have a right to not only offer their opinion, but to be vocal about it. Okay. They are being directly affected.
Okay.
I don't believe that people who live here, and as you phrased it earlier in the conversation, whose kids aren't going into the army and aren't going home at night to have Qassams or Katyushas land on their house, have a right to tell Israelis what national security decisions they should be making. And you could be certain that whatever opinions are being said here in the United States, there are equal opinions saying the same exact thing back in Israel. But I think that that's the line I would say. I was told in this particular thing that the asimon, when we used to say the asimon fell, you remember the asimon?
No.
The asimon was the old token that used to go into the old telephones when you had to wait a year and a half to get a phone, and now Israel's #1 in the world with telephones. But, it's hard to imagine what's happened in 15 years. But, the asimon fell means you figured it out, the light flashed, because the asimon hasn't fallen in your head. I mean, if you talk like that here in America, you're just going to alienate everybody. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that there are lines that even if you alienate people, there's certain lines that you don't cross, but it is a legitimate debate.
Okay, I just want to push it one more moment.
Sure.
So an American Jew feels that the State of Israel's West Bank policy and treatment of the Palestinians, let alone the Arab Israeli, is not nearly Jewish enough. Does the American Jew have the right to go public in print, in the New York Times, on Shalom TV, not simply in a synagogue setting, but public, with criticism of Israeli policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians in the peace process? And, Barry, does it extend to the ability for American Jewry to try to pressure our own government, the American administration, to bring pressure on the State of Israel?
Look, do they have a right? They have a right. That's free speech, and and I believe in democracy.
So I don't mean right.
Okay. Do I take offense?
Is it Jewishly appropriate?
I feel, me personally, and I'm speaking now very personally, I feel that it isn't right, not that they don't have a right, but it isn't right to come start dictating and applying pressure on Israel, whether it's from the right or from the left, I don't care. It's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. Don't tell me I should pull out of the West Bank, the Yehuda v'Shomron, and don't tell me that, God forbid, you should ever consider it. I believe that this is an Israeli issue that has to be decided in Israel, okay? And
there
I
are
think
American Jews who feel that you're too close to the issue, that the Israeli is so close, he's lost a sense of vision. He can't see the forest for the trees,
I understand
and
that
therefore
argument.
you need American Jewish input. Why would you not accept American Jewish input on matters of West Bank treatment of Palestinians, but you would take it on whether the State of Israel should have conversion practices of this kind or that kind?
Again, I've drawn a very arbitrary line that stems from my feeling.
Yes,
and
I understand behind it.
And the philosophy really is, and this is, again, I'm not saying it's right or, sorry about that, I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but it's the way I know I feel, and a lot of other people feel the same way, that I don't believe that people who aren't living there and have to face the kind of dangers that you have to face and have to have your children face the kind of, have a right to tell us how to live our life when it comes to national security. I do believe that when it comes to issues of religion that affect them as well, that they have a right to do that.
I would, I think, endorse 95% of what you say. But I would be possibly a little bit more liberal than you. I can visualize a situation where Jews can have exchanges and criticisms about policies of Israeli governments, as long as they weigh up the totality of the consequences of where they say these things and ask themselves, is this going to endanger or create a situation in which Israel is going to face greater pressures than ever before? What I think is absolutely immoral is for people to describe themselves, as J Street do, as Zionists, and go to a foreign government, being the American government, and tell the American government, these Israelis, you've got to treat them the way parents treat drug-addicted children. Nebuch, we have to look after them. They don't know what's good for them. We know better what's good for them. So you, Mr. President Obama, force them to do what's good for them. I think that this is abominable and obscene. And I think this runs counter not only to Zionism, but to Menschlichkeit and decency from Jews, knowing the context in which we face the situations.
I'll stay away from politics, as I've done. Actually, over the years in the Army, I was always very comfortable hiding behind a uniform. In the Army spokesman's office, that I wasn't, you can't talk politics, or it's safer. And in this job, I'll do the same. But I mean, I think I'm coming from more of an emotional side. And I recognize the fact that it's not a simple thing to say. And that's what, at the time, I was told on that panel, that you don't understand, what you're doing by saying something like that, because you alienate people. And the last thing I want to do in my role is to alienate people. It's a very complicated thing. But I think from a very emotional level, a lot of people would feel that it's hard to take the heat on issues that they don't have to pay the price for. People don't have to pay the price for.
We spoke very casually for a moment about how the early Chalutzim and the David Ben-Gurion mentality, as opposed to Menachem Begin, came with a secular Jewish notion. And I want to tell you one last story, and then I want you to react to it. I was interviewing Alon Ben-Gurion, who is David Ben-Gurion's grandson. And we were talking about how his father felt that as long as one lived in the land of Israel, Be'eretz Yisrael, one did not have to be an observant Jew. And I pointed out to Alon that the biblical promise, because Ben-Gurion based his feeling on biblical Judaism, that in the Bible, if one reads the Bible and the history of the Jewish presence in the State of Israel, and the gift of the State of Israel as it is described in the Torah, it is not an unconditional gift.
No.
It is a gift on condition that the Jew observe the mitzvot.
Yes.
And that I want the Jewish state to reflect the highest of a Jewish sensitivity, which does involve a commitment to Torah on some level. speak to it before we close.
Yeah, well, look, I think you said it yourself, and it's the issue at hand isn't someone's personal level of observance, which is, I think, a very personal thing. And, you know, as an observant Jew, clearly I believe that it's important, and it's made a very big difference in my life. I wasn't always Orthodox. I think it is, but I really believe that it's a very personal thing. But as you're phrasing it, I fully agree that Israel, first of all, Israel is the Jewish state, okay? And if it's the Jewish state, then it has to reflect Jewish values, which is one of the reasons, you know, without getting into the politics of it, why this whole Gilad Shalit campaign that was behind it, and ultimately his release, you know, at the core of it, it goes down to Jewish values. And whether we agree or whether we don't agree about the price that was paid, you can't help but, you know, have a tear in your eye that what a country would be willing to do in order to, you know, I don't know, did you see was it the New Yorker that had that big page about the price?
Gilad Shalit, and then it
1,300, whatever.
How many pounds prisoners were given?
Look at the difference of value of life that we put as opposed to our enemies and put on it. And that at the core is a Jewish value. I truly believe that ultimately Israel, you know, to be successful in the long term, it has to reflect the fact that it's a Jewish state. That could be debated how, and maybe this isn't the place to go into that kind of details, but I truly believe that if those three elements are not there in some way, then we'll have problems, just like we've had throughout our history when one element is missing.
Wrap it up for us.
Well, we're on the same page, and without getting into the Gilad Shalit situation, which I spoke to on a previous program, I think Israel and the Jewish people are different. With all the weaknesses and with all the flaws, it is a very unique Jewish people. And when you look at the pluses against the minuses, and look at what has been achieved in such a relatively short period of time, and when you hear people besmirching us, we have every reason to get angry, because I believe that we are moving in the right direction, and we will overcome the problems that we face in the right direction.
Amen. That's wonderful. Boy, it is so wonderful to talk to the two of you. Barry, it's a pleasure to have you, and I hope you come often. And even after you go back to Israel, we will stay in touch with each other in many ways. But you're always welcome here, and you do a fabulous job for the Jewish Agency.
Thank you very much.
And how much I love you. Oh my God! Thank you always for giving me so much time and insight and wisdom. And we'll just continue to look for you and continue to chase you, and you'll continue to be on. And I appreciate it. But
it's an honor to be with you on this pleasant. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And those were the thoughts of Barry Spielman and Isi Leibler, who talk about where the state of Israel is. And as you saw, the conversation went in an interesting direction. And what you hear from them is that while there are certainly problems which are being recognized and addressed, there are also tremendous successes in the state of Israel, and the connection between American Jewry and the state of Israel and the Israeli people. And it's all about people. It's always about people. The connection we have to the Israeli people. And so many of us here in America who are part of the Jewish community, one of the things we really understand is that we need to do everything we can to help every Jew throughout the world. And that means, of course, and in some way especially, the Jews who are on the front lines in the state of Israel, who make the state of Israel possible every living, breathing day. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim on Shalom TV. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.